Alright guys, Murph's here. And today, as soon as I get my cups ready, today, at viewer request, we're going to discuss 5.56 versus the 7.62 by 3.9. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I have done multiple discussions on the 5.56 cartridge. I've covered the difference between 223 and 5.56. I've done a dedicated 5.56 video. I've done a 5.56 versus 308 video. And I've also done a video on the 7.62 by 3.9, which, as is normal in my cartridge discussion videos, I compared that to another cartridge, and in this case it was the 5.56. However, the viewer in this case is not necessarily looking for the technical data aspect of the discussion that normally characterizes my cartridge discussion videos. He was looking for a very specific set of circumstances. In this case, the requester wanted to discuss which would be better to stockpile in an SHTF or without rule of law situation. Now, first off, what are we talking about? Basically, we're talking about which cartridge better lends itself to the prepper mindset. Now, preppers are people who stockpile ammunition, firearms, food, fuel, water, a whole variety of things so that they can be self-sufficient in the instance that, if we put this into the kind of like worst case scenario, Armageddon occurs. But honestly, really, it's to guard against any type of social, political, and economical collapse, which honestly isn't that hard to come by. So that's what we're talking about, this kind of end of the world situation. Which cartridge would it be better to prep beforehand? Now, a couple things that we need to go ahead and identify with the kind of prepper mindset here. Most preppers will tell you that we are no more than 3 days away from collapse. And basically what that means is if you hit a situation where trucks are no longer rolling, trains are no longer chugging, planes are no longer flying, and boats are not going to the ocean, you are no more than 3 days away from everything falling apart. And this pretty much states that your supermarket, your gas stations, all these places only have 3 days worth of supplies on hand. What we've seen historically is every time things get tight, people get crazy. Even with just minor inconveniences. If you've lived in the South, anytime that there's even the threat of snow, supermarkets become ransacked. Everybody runs out and buys up food and water and milk and bread for whatever reason and stockpile all this stuff. Now, some of this is because when you talk about the South, they're not really set up to be able to handle snow removal. So if you're somebody who's not necessarily comfortable driving in the snow or anything along those lines, this is a perfect excuse to go ahead and stockpile some food so that you have no reason to have to leave the house in that case. Work's gonna get called off. You can just sit and chill and not necessarily worry about yourself or others not being able to handle the snow. But we still see that. That's a fairly inconvenient thing. And even then you see your stores get ransacked. Something very similar could happen in a much more drastic situation. And you see that a lot whenever we talk about like natural disasters, hurricanes, and stuff like that coming in. People start to stockpile a lot of things so that they can shut in and remain safe. We also saw the same type of thing unfold with COVID, which was really just a whole string of just unprecedented events. I can remember, like, I keep a fairly well-stocked pantry and fridge and all that kind of stuff, and freezer, and I remember going to the store to just do my normal grocery run. Like nothing drastic. I wasn't making a special trip just because, you know, everything was going crazy, and shelves were empty. So at that point, yeah, I kind of had to change up what it was that I was getting at that time. Like, a lot of the stuff that I would normally would have shown up for the store was not necessarily in stock, but I started grabbing, like, you know, shelf-stable items, because if you guys remember the early weeks of COVID, there was a lot of, like, uncertainty. There was a lot of crazy stuff getting thrown around out there for possibilities, and, you know, it was definitely unprecedented times for everyone involved. So I just went ahead and grabbed, like, shelf-stable items, which were surprisingly prevalent on store shelves. That really still bugs me to this day. Like, why would you not grab pantry items in this case? Why are you going after things that most definitely will expire pretty rapidly, honestly? Anyway, I digress. Those types of situations occur rather rapidly, and especially whenever it is that you start to talk about like social services and stuff like that. People can't get food, they're not too worried about going to work. And even the people who understand that, like, garbage removal or like water sanitation and stuff like that are super important. If the shortage lasts long enough, that's the lack of supplies is also going to start to extend to materials to be able to keep those machines running, especially if you're talking about like water sanitation and stuff like that. Turns out that the whole machine breaks down if you don't have any grease for the ball bearings. And that's kind of one of those reality type things. You need sustainment in order to be able to last. The military is a perfect example of that. The military understands that sustainment is what keeps forward advance going or allows defense to remain static and all that type of stuff. Bandages, beans, bullets, those are the things that win wars. Not just the soldier on the ground, taking land and all that kind of stuff. Being able to sustain that guy is what keeps it going. Being able to sustain yourself is what keeps you going in these kind of apocalyptic times, whatever that is that it winds up looking like. So, of course, firearms play a role in this, and that's pretty much the extent of my interest in the overall prepper philosophy. I've never really gotten into it. It's just not my thing. But where would a prepper best spend their time between the 5.56 and the 7.62 by 3.9? Well, first off, part of prepper, I guess, idioms or logic and stuff like that is that you're supposed to go after one of the options is to go after NATO standard rounds, so 5.56, 9mm, and 308, because that ammunition is highly available. Now, from a store shelves type standpoint, I don't necessarily think that conversation is as valid as a lot of people might make it out to be. The whole point of prepping is that you buy bulk amount of whatever it is. So first off, buying a bulk amount of ammunition is going to get you cheaper per round. You're just going to spend more money for the overall bulk. In addition to that, the savvy prepper, buys up bulk amounts of ammunition whenever prices are low or something along those lines, which can be very finicky because we've seen a lot of ammo shortages over the years for a variety of different reasons, be it political instability or COVID most definitely did it, as well as like election years or new laws that are coming out and all that kind of stuff. You will frequently see people run out and buy up gobs of ammunition, and then next thing you know, 9mm, 5.56, and 308 are not available. We saw that in COVID. That ammunition went off the shelves super fast. It was very difficult to keep it on the shelves, whereas stuff like 40 Smith & Wesson, 38 Super, the cartridges that are not as popular right now stuck around for a little bit longer. But there's an interesting little shift on the other side of that, where once that supply of, the oddball cartridges was kind of exhausted, you didn't see those replaced as fast as you did 9mm, 5.56, 308, and a couple of other popular cartridges. And in my opinion, that is because ammo manufacturers were preferencing material or production capacity and all that kind of stuff towards the in-demand items, because that's like a capitalism thing. When you have something that's in demand, you produce more of it, and you also quite frequently raise the price as well. Supply and demand, that's like the whole cornerstone of this overall conversation here. Now, 7.62 by 3.9 has also been impacted on this in different ways, though. A lot of our 7.62 by 3.9 is imported. So in the 80s and 90s, when like AKs and SKSs were rolling in, you could get them like super cheap and all that kind of stuff. Cheap Chinese 7.62 by 3.9 was available. However, then we slapped China with some trade sanctions and stuff like that. Next thing you know, the supply of Chinese SKSs, Chinese AKs, and Chinese 7.62 by 3.9 pretty much disappeared. But we still had Russia. We didn't have Russian rifles, but we had 7.62 by 3.9. Up until the recent conflict in Ukraine, which has caused more economic sanctions against Russia, and now we're no longer getting 7.62 by 3.9 out of Russia. This creates its own type of gaps with 7.62 by 3.9, especially when you talk about steel-cased ammunition. There's not really a lot of other manufacturers of steel-cased 7.62 by 3.9, and 7.62 by 3.9 is cheapest in steel-cased form. It's surprising how expensive brass-cased 7.62 by 3.9 gets. So you run into an interesting dynamic whenever it comes to this availability type thing. It's very fickle, and it's something that you have to time just right. But the other aspect of going with NATO standard cartridges is it's post-apocalyptic, without rule of law is the way of life now, and you're just scavenging and all that kind of stuff. The hope is that since police and military utilize those cartridges, you'll be able to scavenge from those stockpiles in one way or another. Like every prepper's dream would pretty much be to be able to like stumble upon a bunker at an ammo supply point that still has like crates upon crates of 5.56 in it. Now I think it's probably pretty low probability of that actually happening in real life, but it could. You could come across government stockpiles or, you know, local law enforcement stockpiles and stuff like that and have access to that ammunition. That'd be pretty fantastic. And I think that, in this comparison, is where the 5.56 wins out. But that's just one portion of this. Let's talk about hand loading real fast, since we're talking about ammunition. When it comes to ammunition loads, you know, woes, I should say, and developing different loads and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of people might say, well, I'll just hand load. And that's how I'll build my stockpile, and that's also how I'll maintain my stockpile into the future. And while I don't fully disagree with that, especially being able to like shoot brass-cased ammunition, collect up your casings, and then, you know, or find other people's discarded casings, something along those lines, and be able to reproduce ammunition is going to be very important. There's a couple things you have to take into account. First off, not every hand loader is created equal. I've seen some real dumb stuff done by some hand loaders. People who are just, I assume that because they hand load, they're automatically good at it. It's not entirely true. It's kind of like, just because your buddy can nail two pieces of wood together, that doesn't make him a carpenter. Okay, it doesn't mean he's good at it. It doesn't mean that he has a knack for it. It just means that he has the ability to be able to do things. I mean, we all do. It doesn't mean that you're good. So that's one of the reasons that I stick with manufactured ammunition. Now, keep in mind, guys, I've done videos on, I think I did a dedicated hand loading video, and I also did a video on what makes bullets accurate. Both of those videos are going to play a big part. Along with the previous videos discussed, all of those will be in the description for links and stuff like that if you guys want to go check out those videos. Buying factory ammunition, the manufacturer has put in the time and effort to have quality control to where the rounds will go consistently bang. Now, there might be some differences in the averages of velocity and all that kind of stuff, but for the most part, factory ammunition is consistent in ignition. Now, of course, every now and again you come across bad lots and stuff like that. It happens. It is something that you have to pay attention to. But you as a hand loader are trying to achieve that same level of quality control without the factory controls put in place, the expensive factory controls put into place. And especially if you're talking about the lack of infrastructure and stuff like that, you may not have consistent access to fuel to keep your generators running or something along those lines. You might have to go into a certain amount of power conservation. How is that going to impact the temperature control of your propellants? You could wind up with some wide variances in there, which in the best case scenario just means that you have some variation in velocity. Maybe it's not a particularly consistent load. In the worst case scenario, you could have massive issues with proper ignition and stuff like that. So gotta keep in mind that if it's just you doing the hand loading, you're the only one who's solely in control of quality control, and that's not necessarily good. Sometimes it's nice to have an extra set of eyes, or, you know, a machine or something like that that's capable of controlling the variables. Now, in that discussion, because we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, in that discussion, I would think the 5.56 is the better option. And this comes back to the availability of 7.62x39 brass-cased ammunition. Because it being more expensive, you're going to have to pay more to stockpile the same amount as you would 5.56. Whereas you can find pretty cheap brass-cased 5.56. It's plenty available. You can do the same thing with 7.62x39 should you choose to do so. But I would say that the 5.56 is the better overall option for this. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and touch on ballistics and stuff like that and compare these two cartridges. Now, I don't want to go super deep into the weeds on the ballistic type aspect. We're going to kind of hit some wave tops as we circle back into contextual type data. The 5.56 is the higher velocity of the two cartridges, coming into, you know, as high as 3,000 feet per second. If you put it in the same barrel length as a 7.62 chambered rifle, which is going to be somewhere between 16 and like 18 inches, then you're looking at like 2,800, 2,900 feet per second out of the 5.56. That's pretty decent. That's really hard to overlook there. Whereas the 7.62 by 3.9 is coming in around 2,400 feet per second. Not necessarily wowing in the velocity department. However, the 5.56 is also less than half the weight of the 7.62 by 3.9. You're talking about commonly 55 and 62 grain ammunition for the 5.56, especially if you're trying to buy bulk amounts, and between 122 and 124 grain 7.62 by 3.9. How does this play into the overall shooting dynamic here? Well, the 5.56 has a flatter shooting trajectory. The 7.62 by 3.9 is known for having a rainbow-like trajectory, which causes some people to state that it is a 200-meter cartridge. However, I push the 7.62 by 3.9 out to 400 with relative ease. I've shot the 5.56 out to 500. AK Operators Union frequently shoots the 7.62 by 3.9 out to 500 and has no real issue with it. So either cartridge is capable. You are maybe going to have to spend more time understanding your holdovers and hold unders for the 7.62 by 3.9, but you can still push it out to that distance. Now, when it comes to downrange performance and stuff like that, we are talking about intermediate cartridges. So they're not necessarily full power rifle cartridges, but they are still drastically more powerful than a handgun. Now, there's a limitation to this power. It's not like they're going to punch through every type of armor vest that is out there. The vast majority of armor that's available out on the market today is capable of being able to handle pretty much any intermediate cartridge. So you're not really getting any free chicken there. You're still going to have to either preference headshots or pelvic girdle shots on an opponent that's wearing body armor, regardless of if you're using a handgun or a intermediate cartridge. And really, when you look at most intermediate cartridges, there's not a whole lot of difference between them. You gotta like really split hairs to find something that makes a 6.5 Grendel demonstrably better than a 7.62 by 3.9 or a 5.45 versus a 300 Blackout or any of those types of things. All of these are fairly comparable cartridges to begin with. There's not a lot of it's like user preference at the end of the day. What matches your particular scenario a little bit better, which is kind of indicative of the overall conversation that we're having right now. One of the issues that I have with the 5.56 versus the 7.62 by 3.9 is that the 5.56 is very much so chained to its velocity. The 5.56, as is the vast majority of high velocity rounds, needs velocity in order to be able to get its optimal wounding capability. Now, the whole advantage of the 5.56 is its ability to yaw, which means that the bullet begins to roll and break upon impact, which changes its dynamic with its cavitation and all that kind of stuff, and wound channel and all those types of things. When you diminish velocity, which is what's going to happen as it reaches out to distance, you're not going to be able to get as much of that yaw effect, as much good cavitation. Whereas 7.62 by 3.9 just functions like a normal rifle round. So whatever energy it is that it takes into the target media is what the cavitation is going to wind up looking like, and then it's just going to continue to travel on through. No different than a 308 or anything else. It doesn't work around the concept of yaw. With that being the case, 7.62 by 3.9 is going to be a little bit more consistent performer out to distance. It's still chained to velocity, but it's not starting off at a fantastic velocity to begin with. This is an instance where mass is going to be taking over and doing the rest of the workforce. And this is where it being over twice the weight of the 5.56 is really an advantage. Now, this same type of discussion can be found in long-range performance as well. The 5.56 being a lightweight bullet, you're generally talking about 55 and 62 grain projectiles. They're going to get pushed around by the wind really easily. Now, on the other hand, the 7.62 by 3.9 doesn't really have very many, excuse me, doesn't have very many match loads out there for it. And the vast majority of the projectiles for it are like flat-based. It is also, with its greater mass, greater size and all that kind of stuff, going to get pushed around by the wind. So neither one of these has the good relationship with ballistic coefficients in order to be more resistant to wind push out at distance. So looking at the parts of the whole of this kind of velocity-driven aspect of this discussion, the 5.56 is perfectly capable of taking down like deer-sized animal. Most places in the United States, it is not legal to hunt with the 5.56, but plenty of people do. I hear about it all the time. I think one of the important things to take into account because you do want a clean kill, not just for the aspect of like you want to be humane to the animal, but you also don't want to waste a bunch of additional energy pursuing the animal and potentially having to fire more than one round at it. You kind of want your shots to count. This is where your shot placement crowd and all that kind of stuff comes into it. But part of like good shot placement is having a capable cartridge to work as well, engaging within distances that are favorable to your cartridge. That's a lot of considerations you're going to have to take into account for the 5.56. So like in pig hunting, you'll frequently see people utilizing 5.56 AR-15s. That is because in a lot of places in the United States, like if you go into Texas and stuff like that, pig hunting is hunting in the form of population control, not so much in the form of, sportsmanlike conduct and putting food on the table and all that kind of stuff. Sure, they eat some of the stuff that they kill, but it's extermination. It's because they're vermin and they're completely out of control in population. So there are entire companies that are running around out there with, dune buggies and suppressed 5.56 rifles and night vision and all this kind of stuff. And they're putting multiple hits into a pig, but it doesn't matter. They're not trying to get that meat or anything like that. They just need that animal dead, so that it stops messing up crops or in some way impacting cattle or something along those lines. So 5.56 in this case is not being used because it's an effective pig killing cartridge. It's being used because it's lighter recoiling, easy handling, and you can get faster follow-up shots to be able to put that animal down, multiple other animals. The weapon systems that it comes chambered in are easily adaptable to a lot of the accessories that are favorable for this type of hunting. Blah 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 blah. 7.62 by 3.9 on the other hand is a little bit better of a performer on pigs and deer and all those types of things. Now, ballistic trajectory, the capability of your ammunition and all that kind of stuff might cause you to also still have to take fairly close shots. But I think the 7.62 by 3.9 will be the more consistent performing hunting cartridge than the 5.56. So in my own preference, in this case, I would give it to the 7.62 by 3.9. With a 5.56, you might wind up having a 30-06 that you keep around or a 308 that you keep around for hunting type purposes, and you have an allocated area for that ammunition that's maybe not as much as you have for your 5.56. But if the period of without rule of law goes on long enough, you may exhaust that ammunition and have to start using your 5.56 rifle to hunt. That's a probability or a possibility that you have to prepare for. The last area that I want to discuss is the actual rifle platforms, because I do think this plays a part in the overall context. There are tons of rifles made in 7.62 by 3.9 as well as 5.56, but if we're looking for universal consistency, I would say AKs are the most prevalent 7.62 by 3.9 platform out there, and the AR-15 is the most prevalent 5.56 platform out there. The great thing about the AR-15 is that it's highly adaptable. It's very easy to put together, it's very easy to build one, it's very easy to maintain one. You can find tons of parts, you can find magazines, all these types of things. An AK, on the other hand, is a little bit more difficult to build at home. So an AR-15, you just need a rough understanding of how tools work, what parts need to go where, and then have the appropriate tools, whereas an AK, you need a full-on shop. Brendan Herrera made a video a while back where he built his first AR-15, and one of the jokes that he dropped in there was like, oh, right, no, this will be super easy because AR-15 guys are afraid of real tools. And while that's funny, and I get the jab that he's throwing right there, if you're talking about being able to maintain something when all infrastructure has failed, an AK is not where I'm going to park this. I'm going to need a lot more hydraulic press. I'm going to need tons of pretty beefy tools that require a lot of know-how and skill to be able to utilize, as opposed to being able to just build an AR-15. This becomes important if we're talking about long-term without rule of law, because you could very well get into a position where you shoot a barrel out, or you have some sort of catastrophic failure of your ammunition and your upper comes from together. Well, as long as the lower is okay, you can just go ahead and pop a new upper onto there. Or if you shoot your barrel out, it's pretty easy to take a barrel nut off, pop in a new barrel, put the barrel nut back on, get your handguard in there, and then you're good to go. AK, not so much. A lot of things that you got to do with an AK. And a lot of tools are going to be required for an AK. So, not necessarily a good start. In addition to that, if we start talking about accessories and all those types of things, it's very easy to put accessories onto an AR, be it optics, lights, whatever it is. AKs, though the market has gotten a lot better for them, it's not as good. It still requires more like hand fitting, and you kind of gotta like get into the right parts and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of things that go into making sure that your AK is going to be as adaptable as an AR-15. An AR-15 is pretty much just ready to go. An even further contextual point of that are things like which one of these better accommodates optics. ARs, great when it comes to optics. You can pretty much set it up however it is that you want, like your cheek stock weld and all those types of things. You can get high mounts, you can get low mounts, all that kind of stuff. With AKs, it's not as easy. If you're trying to run magnified optics off of an AK, you're either going to have to go with a rail dust cover, which I do not recommend, or you're going to have to go off of side rail mounts, which wind up being a little bit higher than you might want them to be, and you're getting more of a chin weld than a cheek weld. Is that a big deal? Depends. You're going to have to better understand how it is that your height over bore and all that kind of stuff works at that point. It's not going to be as plug and play as an AR-15, but it is still doable. Between the two, now this is also where someone might say, well, I can get, 7.62 by 3.9 chambered AR-15s, and you're absolutely right. There's a ton of them out there on the market. However, when you're talking about an AR-15 platform rechambered into 7.62 by 3.9, you're looking at an AR-15 size bolt that the bolt head has been thinned out in order to be able to accommodate the fatter cartridge base of the 7.62 by 3.9, which means that your locking lugs are on a much thinner surface, and they have a higher probability of shearing. It's one of the big things about that. It's a major maintenance concern because you're talking about a couple thousand rounds, and then that bolt could shear. Now, if you're preparing for this, if you're prepping, then you could go ahead and have like a bunch of bolts lying around, and that's good to go. The question becomes, when will that bolt shear? Because it's not going to happen when it's just sitting next to your bed. You're not just going to wake up one day and the 1 in 7 locking lug is gone. It's going to happen while you're shooting it. It's probably going to happen at a pretty inopportune time. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. That's definitely a source of potential concern. So I think in this case, I would pretty solidly hand the platform aspect of this discussion over to the 5.56. All right, what are my final conclusions? Which is better to stockpile, or 5.56 or 7.62 by 3.9? I personally think the 5.56 is the better overall option. I don't think you would be wrong in giving either one space in your stockpile. 100%. That's the bottom line up front. You can't go wrong. But if we're looking for, splitting hairs and getting into the minutia of which one's more optimal, 5.56 has a lot of things going for it, especially in this country where it's so readily available. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and it's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.